Installing kitchen cabinets on a wall that is not flat can be as difficult as it is important. But as in many areas of life, preparation is key. So in this video, I want to share with you my 3-step process for getting the job done with a great result every single time. So let's get started. Before we get to the 3-step process of hanging suspension rails, allow me to explain to you why it's important that we do this in a certain manner. And there's no better way of doing this by looking at an example. Here we have a very long line of cabinets, and if we see them from above, you can probably imagine that it's not a big deal to hang these suspension rails and the cabinets on the wall if the wall is absolutely flat. But in most cases, the wall is not flat, and that's really why we're making this video, because how do we deal with this? Well, in this example, the wall is kind of broken, and that's because they added a room to the kitchen and took down a wall right there where the green line is. And then it happens that the two walls in those two rooms, they are not on the same line, and that's why the wall is broken. As you can see, it could also be that the wall was going the other way, so it was breaking backwards, right? And then sometimes we have both, where the wall is going in and out, so it's really curvy and not flat at all. And as you can imagine, if we start hanging cabinets on a wall like that, it will not be cabinets sitting on a straight line, and at some point they might be divided up into two sections, like you see here, where we will have to put a filler in between those two sections to make them look nice. Not that they will look nice with the filler though. Another solution could be to put a peninsula right there, because we have a filler anyway. Will that not look nice? Well, it might look nice until you start putting on your countertops, because what will happen is that the countertop, of course, will not be one long straight piece. It will also bend backwards or bend forwards, whatever the wall is bending. And the same can be said if you don't put in a peninsula, you just have a long line of cabinets that are not sitting flat in long straight line. The countertop will of course look the same, and we really don't want that. So it is important that we straighten out the rail so it's flat. In this example I used a lot of cabinets, but even though you only have a few cabinets, it is important that the rail is flat on the wall. And let me just show you this kitchen setup that inspired me to do this video, because it is indeed a long line of cabinets, and the peninsula is not in there to rectify anything. The peninsula is in there because that's how the client designed this layout plan. They took out a wall, and as you can see right there, you might see a shadow on the wall, and that is where the wall is coming out right there in the middle. So this wall is actually bending backwards. So we have we can say, highest point right there in the middle where the two rooms met. So if I want all these cabinets to sit on a straight line, I will have to shim the rail out away from the wall at both ends. So it's sitting tight to the wall right in the middle where the wall is coming out, and is shimmed at both ends so it can become a long straight line. And just to make it easier to see, I have removed the peninsula, but as you can see, that red line represents a straight line, my rail, and I have to shim at both ends of that rail in order to make the rail as straight as the line. And if you're wondering why we just don't shim at one end of the rail, well, we can do that, but clearly the consequences are that we have to shim out a lot if we want to take away that clearance from the rail to the wall at one end only, instead of distributing it at both ends. Sometimes it makes sense to shim the opposite end, and sometimes, like I did in this case, I shimmed at both ends. Before I started to shim though, I scraped away a bit of the mud right there where those two rooms met, because there was a lot of mud on the wall. And that's often the case when you have to smoothen out the difference between two rooms. So I took some of that away, and I dug my rail into the wall before I started to shim. So that was kind of my baseline. And then I shimmed at both ends, and the procedure, we'll get to that in a second, where I will show you how I do that, but I want to show you the result. As you can see, as we go along here, there's a lot of shims in there. And if we get to this point, you will see that I actually did a little mistake, because clearly I could have used a bit more shim right there where those two cabinets are meeting, because there is a little bit of clearance at the back. However, it's really not a problem. It's not a lot of clearance, and it's at the back, so you won't see it from the front. But should it have been really to A+, it should have been pushed out a little bit more at that very spot. And now for step number 1 in my 3-step process for making sure that the rails are sitting flat on the wall. Step number 1 is assessing the wall. What is the condition of the wall? How bad is it? So checking the wall to see if there's any bumps or to see how flat it is really is easily done with the help of this suspension rail. As you can see, I'm doing that by putting the rail on the edge, not flat on the wall clearly, but on the edge. And then you move it along the line where you're going to install the rail. And then you can clearly see if the wall is flat or not. And of course you have to move the rail along the line so you cover the whole stretch where you're going to be hanging cabinets. And you need to especially pay attention to where the brackets are going on the rail. So it's important that you mark on the wall where the cabinets go, so you know if it's a 30-inch cabinet go to here and an 18-inch go to there, so you know where the brackets are going, because those points need to be sitting on a line. Now that we have a clear understanding of the condition of the wall, we can make a decision on where to shim. Apart from shimming, we also need to decide if the stretch of cabinet is longer than one rail, whether we need to put 2 rails up, or we can take 1 rail and cut it so we can kind of stretch the rail on the wall. And it sounds like something that's not really possible, but I have a video explaining exactly how that is done, and you can see that at the end of this video. I will share a link with you. And the reason for doing so is that we don't want to have just, let's say you have 88 inches of rail you have to put up, and the rail is 84 inches long. You don't want to add 4 inches, right? So how do we do that? Well, check that video, because what you see in this picture, that's not the way to do it. The reason I'm marking the studs on the wall is not only to know where the screws are going, but it's also to decide where do I cut the rail, because this is a 2-part rail. So in order for me to plan which rail goes where, I need to know where the studs are. So that's what I'm doing. And now the final step in the 3-step process is to really hang the rails on the wall. Execute. We're not going to kill anyone, but we're going to hang the rails. And for that purpose, I put up my laser. And I have another video about where do that laser line go. So we're not going to go into that in this video, but what I do want to tell you though is that you should pick the right screw for the job. I have seen many occasions where people are using a screw that is simply not strong enough, and then guess what? Cabinets come loose, and you don't want that to happen. If you have a stud wall, that means it's a gypsum on a stud, wooden stud in the wall. I can highly recommend using the screw you see in this picture. It has a big flat round pan head, and it's really good. I use a 2.5 inch long screw. I think it's 1/4 of an inch. It's called, I don't know why, because it's not 1/4 of an inch. Maybe it's from the maximum diameter of the shaft of that screw where we have the threads. But I recommend using that screw. If you check the description to this video, I will put a link in there where you can see some more details on that screw. So you just install your rail on the wall, and make sure to put a screw in every single stud. And what I do is I check while I'm doing it. I check that it's flat. I have a pretty good idea where we need to shim because I just make the assessment of the wall. But I check nevertheless that everything is flat. So when I get to the very end of the whole deal with hanging the rails, I take another rail and I put it on and I run it along those sections of rails on the wall so I can see, wow, it's flat. And if it's not, I make some adjustments. I either put in more shim or take some shims out. So get going, hang your rail. It's not difficult, as long as you remember to keep at it until it's flat, horizontal, and exactly where you want it. You cannot fail. I'm not going to say much about the last part of this video, but I want you to see it anyway, that this is a rail on a piece of wall that is really not flat. So there's some shims going in at the right hand side. And the reason I'm showing this is because this is the left side of the room where we have the stove right in the middle. So when you put up a rail like this, you also have to consider what's going on the other side of that stove, and that's why you'll see in the video here that I'm pushing my long rail over to check how it lines up with the rest of the rail, which is outside the picture. Before you go, I want to share two videos with you, and the first one here is the one I mentioned before where we are stretching the rails, and the last one is also about rails. And in this video you will learn how to make an assessment of your ceiling and your floor and a few other things so you don't get into trouble when you're hanging your suspension rails.